right, so glazing mugs. There's some very specific things you need to do when it comes to glazing mugs. And the first thing is your piece needs to be bisque fired, right? So it's going to come out. Sounds good, right? Sounds like glass, and it needs to be bisque fired. If you can't figure that out, come find me and we'll go over if it's fired or not. Okay, so this is a piece that I did last time. Did we go over how to smooth out the rims and stuff?
Yeah.
So we did that in class with the sponges. Okay. So you have your mugs, right? And you're going to have two options on glazing these. We are not underglazing them, and we are not putting colored slip on. In fact, if you put colored slip on these and put a clear glaze on it, your piece is going to have colored slip all over the shelves next to it, because that colored slip won't stick. So we've got to pay attention to our process and what the materials can do. So we have our piece, and we get to choose one of two types of glaze. So up here, we have our dipping glazes, okay? And on these dipping glazes, on the board, we have a key. So that key tells us what the glazes are. So what that looks like for you is this. So Tenmoku is the back left, and it's a dark brown, and it goes almost black. And there's a little guy right here that is Tenmoku, okay? And it'll be back here. The one right in front, number 2, right here, is this teal blue. Okay, sometimes I call it blue-green, so I'll use that interchangeable. So it's like that. It's a translucent glaze, which means you can see all the color or all the textures underneath it. Where some, like Tenmoku, when it goes on thick, you can't see as much. Okay, so translucent, opaque, we'll kind of go from there. Then in the back, we have a semi-translucent green. Okay, it's like an army green. Can't really tell on the screen, but it's like an army green. Okay, and then up front, we have plum. Now, if we run out of these, I'll change them for another glaze. Okay, and we'll change it up here. So back left, up front, back center, and then front center. You are not allowed to use any of the glazes on the floor. Okay, and then we have clear over on the far right. You can use any of the dipping glazes up top. When I pick glazes for Ceramics 1, I pick them for 2 reasons. One, they're not volatile. Volatile means they don't run all over the place, okay? They stay put. If you mess up a little bit, it should be okay. 2, for the looks, okay? And it's in that order. The stuff on the ground, Ceramics 2 and 3 start to learn how to use because they understand how to glaze a little bit better, and they are less prone to messing up on their application. So, dipping glazes, right there. The next one is right over here. And these are our paint-on glazes. Okay, these are different than underglazes. Okay, they look similar, but they're different, and you've got to make that distinction. This says Cone 6 glaze. Those back there say underglaze. And you've got to make sure you read the label before you apply them, or you're not going to get the results you want. Okay, so that's our paint-on glazes. Okay. So let's start with dipping. It's pretty simple, and you can choose how your glazes go on. Dipping usually is an overall glaze. So you take your your mug, you're gonna dip the whole thing in one glaze. There are some variations to that. It could be you pour in on the inside and then dip the outside, okay? You could do like a half and half where we put half one, half the other with just a tiny bit of overlap, okay? But we're not gonna go crazy with our color applications. So we're gonna come here and I'm gonna dip this in blue-green or teal blue. So I'm gonna stir this. Now this back one is water. It is not a glaze. If you dip your mug in there, it'll come out, it'll look like it has red on it. When you fire it, it will look pretty ugly. So don't use the water. So I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna stir it. In your head count. I'm going to lift up a little bit. How long was that? How much?
30 seconds.
About 30 seconds. Okay, so your ideal mixing time is 30 seconds. All right, now these are the tongs, T-O-N-G-S, that somebody didn't clean off, so we're gonna clean those off. You could take them over and use a sponge to wipe them off a little bit. Now, one of the things you're going to go is contamination. So as I pull the red water and put a little bit of that into my green bucket, you're gonna think, is that gonna change the glaze? The answer is it could, but it probably won't. And why it won't is there's a lot of glaze in there, and we go through that glaze so fast that you're not gonna put that much colorant into that glaze. And the overall glaze is blue-green with just a little bit of red added, okay? And I've been using this glaze for 12 years now. Like, we keep replenishing it, and it just gives us the same consistent results. So a little bit of contamination is not gonna go very far. So I mix that. Now, as we hold this, you're gonna hold this not at the top, but down in the middle somewhere. And you're gonna hold it like a handshake, okay? You're just gonna hold this, and when I dip it, I'm gonna dip it down and in, submerge it, pull it back and out. Now, before I dip it, there are a lot of things we could do to this. It's gonna just be teal all the way. If you wanted to do something else, let's say you wanted the handle a different color and you want to paint that on, you could do one of two things. You could wrap that in tape and dip the whole thing, unwrap it, and then you could paint that on, or you could wipe it off. Okay, either one of those will work just fine. And that's probably what we'll do to this one, just so you can see how we play around with that. So I'm gonna come in here, I'm gonna dip it down, and I'm gonna pull it out. That's one coat in less than 3 seconds, right? That's the same with our clear glaze. I'm gonna hold it here. Seems a little thick, and I only say it's a little thick because it's taken a little longer to dry than I like, which means I'll add some water to it. It'll be fine when you use it. And I'm gonna set it down there. Now, rinse off your tongs. So these are your tongs. I'm gonna set those there. At one point I had 4 pair of tongs, and I have 1. So somebody chucked them. Okay, so that's gonna dry. Now, I'm gonna have a bucket. This is my bucket. This has red glaze in it, and actually it's just water. It's just red now. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to clean the bottom. Now, a lot of you, let's bring it up front here so you can see right here. A lot of you are going to skip some steps. And this is a really important step not to skip. If you take this mug and put it down on the table here, it's going to rub that glaze off. And I see this over and over. As a beginner, you're going to either not notice it, not care, or you're just in such a hurry to get out of here that you put it up on the shelf anyways. Okay? Once that's chipped, it's not going to look as nice, and it's not going to function as well, which means it's not going to be food safe. So we've got to be careful on that. So when I do mine, I hold it in my hand, get a sponge, and wipe it off. For you, if you want, come over here right underneath the buckets of glaze, grab one of these sponges. You can set that on that sponge. And that way when I push on it, it's not going to hit this hard table and crack my rim. Then I'm going to come in here and wipe that off. Now, this water is red. There's not that much colorant in it. It's not going to affect my glaze, but it will affect your clothes if you get it on there. So you can go over and grab some clean water, whatever works for you. So now I'm going to come and I'm going to wipe up the bottom just a little bit so that when I set it down and I look at it, I can see just a tiny line of clay around. So there's a line of glaze and then clay and then the table. Anyone remember what this bottom is called? When we cut that taper in, anyone remember what I called that? Has to do with glaze. A glaze stop. So that glaze stop, and it's what it's designed for. So the glaze is going to hit right here and pool there a little bit, and then hopefully you didn't overglaze it. Okay. So how many coats? One coat. How many seconds? 3. Now, since I'm going to pull out some paint on glazes, I'm just going to wipe off my handle here. Just on the outside, because I want to go crazy. So as I do that, it's leaving some down in the cracks, and that's fine. Okay, and then we're going to go from there. Now, a question you might have, what do I do about the tongue marks? There's little like vampire marks in there. For the most part, they're going to melt themselves. But if you want, you can just take your finger now that it's dry, and you can buff those right out. Outside looks good. Okay. From there, if you have a question, please come and ask me, and we can make sure it gets resolved. So the handle is not glazed. I could leave the handle like that. Anyone want to guess why? What? For funds? It would do something. You'd be able to see some of that glaze in the handle. It would not be as shiny, but it's not food safe, but food doesn't go on the handle, right? So if you wanted to, you could, just like with the bottom. And then we're going to set this over here. Right? But we'll do something with that handle. Okay. I'm going to grab a couple of paintbrushes. And there are big ones, medium ones, and tiny ones. So paintbrushes. Make sure I covered all the things I needed there. I put the lid back on. Okay, if you don't wipe the bottom off, what do you think happens?
Sticks to the shelf.
Yeah, it runs down and it sticks to the shelf. Okay. So the definition, my definition of a glaze is materials mixed together, applied appropriately, fired to a specific temperature to get the desired result. So on the dipping glazes, you come up here and you go, I want this color. Okay, it's translucent green or semi-translucent green, and I want that. I'm calling that like an army green. Perfect. So you pick the one it is, you mix it up for 30 seconds, you dip that in for less than 3 seconds, one coat, and then you wipe the bottom off, right? Okay, for paint-on glazes, there are 7 things I need you to know about paint-on glazing. The first, before you, and this is the same first over here, is we make sure that our mug is fired. That's number 1. Okay. Number 2, we're going to pick our glaze. So we come over here and we're going to pick a glaze. Every one of these glazes has a little sticker on it, and it tells us what that glaze is. Okay. So I'm gonna pick a glaze. It doesn't really matter. I don't know why it's that hard. There's a white. I don't want white, so I guess it does matter. Cerulean satin. Satin is not glossy. It is not matte, which is no gloss. It's like right in between. It's like a nice smooth feel. And I want this one. Okay, so I'm going to read it. And this says, stir well, apply to bisque, 1 coat for dipping or pouring, 2 to 3 coats for brushing. Okay, we're going to brush on. We're not going to dip in here. We're not going to pour from here. Please don't. That's a $20 thing, and if you pour, you're going to use half of it. But we're going to brush from here. So the next step, so we picked our glaze, and this happens every time. I check the lid and make sure that it's screwed on tight. You're going to find some of these. They look all pretty good today, but somebody's going to take it and they're going to put it back, and it's going to be up just a little bit. Okay? Now, the chance of that spilling is pretty high. So first is you're going to make sure your piece is fired. Second, you're going to pick a glaze. Third, you're going to check the lid. Make sure that it's tight. Fourth, you're going to mix this, and this is how we mix our glazes. You either put a finger on the top or a thumb on the top. I prefer a finger, and you're going to shake it for about 10 seconds. Because it's materials mixed together. If we don't mix this up properly, it's not going to look the way we want, right? So check the lid and mix it up. Some of these have never been used. They're brand new. Some of them haven't been used for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. So you've got to make sure they're shaken up pretty well. Okay, then we shook the glaze, and now I'm going to open it and apply it. So I'm going to come back over here. How many coats do I apply? 2 to 3. So a good rule of thumb is 3. Not more than 3, for sure. So I'm going to come in here and take this, and we're going to apply it. So this is a pretty runny glaze. Apply that. Okay, but if you look, it's starting to dry really quickly. So what I do is I start in one direction. I'm going to go all the way around till I hit the other side. And then I'll start over. I could, okay, so we got one coat. And usually when I apply this, I applied this way. So the next one I'm going to apply up and down. So I'm changing my brush strokes. So we get that nice and dry. And then we're going to apply that. Before I do that, I'm going to do the bottom. So put that in there. Do not paint the bottom, because when you do, you're just going to have to wipe it off. So there's no reason to paint the bottom. Dipping is different because there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Okay. So one coat of this will seal it up enough that it's probably food safe. 2 coats, it'll start to look good, and 3 coats should give us the right amount of what aesthetics or what we're looking for. Okay, so we're going to let that sit. While that's sitting, I'm going to do my handle here. Try not to overlap too much. If I overlap this too much, what do you think happens? You get a different color because it's going to mix differently, but more importantly, it's probably going to run. If it runs too far, it's going to stick. And if it sticks, then a piece of your mug comes with it when I pull it out. So we don't want to do that. So there's 2 good coats on there. That's probably all I'll do on that. So now I'll have a darker blue handle with a lighter blue mug. Okay, you could do that same thing with a little seashell, and it can overlap a little bit, just not a whole bunch. So set that aside. Now we got this, so we got 1 coat, and now I'm just going to paint this up like so. I am not a detailed painter when it comes to these, and you'll actually get better results if you don't, let me rephrase that. You're going to get better results if you do bigger brush strokes and don't try to be very specific. If you need something very specific, on our next project, you can do that with underglazes. You can get very specific colors. But these are pick a glaze, and it's pretty much an overall glaze. Put it all over your piece. Now, because we like to get a little crazy here, I'm going to paint the rim. Okay, that's 1 good coat. And I'm going to put this away. Put the lid on, make sure it's tight. Put that in there. You can put it over by the sink. I'm going to put it back up in here, and I'm going to grab my other glaze. I check the lid, I put my finger on the lid, and now I'm going to apply. So the 7 things: make sure your piece is is bisque fired. Pick your glaze, check the lid, then you're going to shake it with a finger or thumb on the top. It's really important, because if you don't have a finger or thumb on the top and you didn't check that lid and it goes flying, it's going to get all over something. Okay, so that's 4, right? So then you're going to open it and apply it. That's 5. Then you're going to put the lid back on. That's 6. And then you're going to put it back on the shelf. Please don't leave the glazes out for other people. So now I have another brush. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to do the inside. So if you want to have a mug that has 2 colors, inside one color, outside another, paint on is a great way of going. Throw this on here pretty quickly. try to keep track of your layer counts. So that's one layer, okay? And I'm gonna let that dry, and then I can do two. Question that usually arises is this. If I don't finish glazing today, can I finish on the next class period or after school? The answer is yes. Do I recommend it? No, and here's why. One, you'll forget or could forget how many layers you put on, okay? Two, the glaze could be gone, okay? I probably only have one of these, and as we start using it, let's say everyone wants to do smoked sienna. When you come back, if we do 10 mugs, this will be gone. So I would do it today, if possible, right now. All right, it's almost dry. We're going to paint the handle. And in those nice little areas where it overlaps, you will get some color variation. If I haven't told you already, the darker the color, the more red the color, the worse it stains. It has iron in it, and the iron will stain. Now we're going to put another coat on the inside. And I'm just going to do 2 coats. But the general rule is how many coats? 3. Okay, how many coats did I put on the rim? Do you remember? 1. So I'm going to put another coat of this up top there. Because I'm still sticking within my 2 to 3 rule, right? So that's up there. That should be good. Check the bottom. That's not a problem. And we're going to set them. Up there. Okay, 5 and 6, put the lid back on correctly. And put away. So when I say find your glaze, that also means read the label and make sure it's the correct type of glaze. And if you don't know, come ask, so we can work through that. So there's something about glaze, and not all glaze is like this, but some is, that's called breaking. So I'm going to pass these 2 around. They both are good examples of breaking. These are one color, 3 coat applications, but where it's thin on texture or thick in like grooves, it will change colors. So breaking in glaze is where the colors will change, or there's a color variation. Some glazes don't break. Tenmoku doesn't break. Unless you have really deep textures, and then there's a little light area where it's thin. All right, next thing. I need to cover. Oh, this. We've dipped it, or we've painted on. Stirred for 30 seconds, dip for less than 3 seconds, 1 coat. Shaken with the lid, finger on the lid. 3 coats maximum. Okay. Do I need to put on a clear coat? The answer is no. These are standalone glazes. They do their job. In the case of these up here, they're going to come out shiny. In the case of that satin one, it'll come out less shiny, but it's still food safe. And if you look at any of the rest of those, most of them are going to come out shiny. So whatever the tag says. If you put on a clear glaze after you put on 3 coats of that, what rule have you broken? The amount of layers. You put on 3 coats, which is the correct amount, and then 1 more coat of dipping glazes, and the chance of that running down and sticking to the shelf is pretty high. So make sure you pay attention to that. Any questions on how to glaze a mug and what your options are? Okay, some things I'll be looking for. No, we won't even cover that.